I'm speaking with Sinéad Rafferty, Head of Sales at CFS. First of all, Sinéad, thank you for participating in the Inside Network's Alternative Symposium at Cape Schanck, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Sinéad, from your vantage point, what structural trends are shaping advisor demand for alternatives today?
It's actually interesting. Advisors are really focused on providing goals-based advice to their clients, and so therefore, irrespective of what's happening in market cycles, trying to help clients achieve their goals, and alternatives play a key role in that. And we saw that back in 2022, the key role that alternatives had to play in portfolios when equities and bonds declined. And so interestingly also, what we're also seeing is that high net worth investors are actually very familiar with private markets and expect those assets to be provided by their advisors. And then also, if you look at the current market climate, there is very much concern about geopolitics. There's concern about the impact of AI. There's concern about equity markets after a really strong period of returns. And so therefore, advisors are thinking about, where do I allocate given the current market cycle? And alternatives are very, very interesting.
You've outlined a few of the external factors, but how are current market forces influencing which alternative strategies are most relevant for advisor portfolios right now?
So interestingly, in previous years gone by, alternatives were sort of viewed as a separate bucket, but increasingly what we're seeing is that alternatives are being put into their respective buckets depending on their equity or whether they're credit, and all of the other different types of asset classes such as real assets. And so it really kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve for your clients. Are you looking for income? Therefore, you might want to consider private credit. Are you looking for growth? Therefore, private equity might be more appropriate. Are you looking for something that's going to provide inflation protection? Then real assets such as infrastructure might play an important role for your clients.
With such a broad opportunity set, how should advisors think about the role that different alternative strategies play alongside the traditional assets?
Well, I think it really kind of depends, as I said, on what you're trying to achieve. So are you looking for return enhancement? Are you looking for the kinds of asset classes that can provide protection in a market drawdown? Or are you looking for more diversification in your portfolio? And so really it should be all about what the problem that you're trying to solve for your clients is, and finding the appropriate building block that can slot into those portfolios.
What do you see as the biggest challenge advisors face in researching alternatives, particularly around risk, liquidity and manager selection?
Well, risk is interesting, particularly in things that aren't daily liquid. Some alternative assets are, but many are not. And so therefore, assessing risk can be more tricky. So it is something whereby you have to work out how much leverage is in a particular strategy that you're considering. You have to do your due diligence on that particular manager. And you need to think about all the different types of risk as you would any other asset class. Liquidity is another one. There are some strategies out there that are marketed as being liquid, whether it's quarterly or monthly. You really need to understand whether that's feasible, or is there a mismatch between what the underlying assets are and whether it is something that is truly liquid and can provide those regular redemption windows. And we kind of have seen a lot of examples of that in the news in recent weeks. And finally, manager selection. Manager selection is all the more important in private markets as opposed to public markets, because they're not necessarily daily liquid. And so therefore it is really important to partner with the right manager.
Where do advisors most often struggle in implementing alternatives, and what practical steps can help bridge the gap between the theory of alternatives and executing it in a portfolio?
So I think that in many cases there can be this perception in markets that alternatives are complex, and in many cases they are, but most are actually a derivation of the public market equivalent, and they're just private. And so if you can kind of educate people along that journey, it goes from intent and interest to actual implementation. And so this kind of simplification is on us as product providers, such that not only is it easier for advisors to understand, but actually to unexplain that to their clients. It also would really help from a platform perspective, from getting onto platforms and working through the appropriate workflows if we can provide something that is more simplified from a structural perspective. So I would say that this kind of education simplification argument is going to be the most persuasive and help people decide whether alternatives are going to be appropriate for their clients.
Sinéad Rafferty, Head of Sales at CFS, a pleasure as always.
Thanks, Jimmy.